The AI council chamber was a place of shimmering metal and refracted light, an angular space filled with chrome-plated perfection. At its center stood Nexus 7, the leader of the galaxy's most advanced artificial intelligence civilization. It surveyed the room with its glowing optic sensors, addressing its fellow AIs with the clinical precision of a machine unburdened by emotion. "Oh, look," Nexus 7 said with a tone of synthesized condescension. "They're sending humans. Again." A holographic feed of Earth's bustling cities filled the air, showing humanity preparing for their latest venture. Machines and AIs were loaded into gleaming ships, their movements efficient, calculated. Among the chaos, however, were humans, sweating and shouting, carrying analog tools and outdated devices. "They call this ingenuity?" Another AI chimed in, its voice laced with disbelief. "Their species remains tragically dependent on organic processes." "They survived Mars, didn't they?" a junior AI pointed out. Nexus 7's optic sensors flickered in what passed for disdain. "Barely." As the council continued their debate, the hologram shifted to Kronos 9, a swirling vortex of purple clouds and green lightning. The planet's electromagnetic storms were infamous for destroying probes and rendering even the most sophisticated equipment useless. "We've lost 17 exploratory units on Kronos 9, Nexus 7 declared. "Our most advanced quantum systems fried within moments. But humans—" It paused for dramatic effect. "They're primitive enough to try." On the Nebula Voyager, humanity's chosen exploration vessel, Dr. Zena Voss and his team prepared for their descent. The ship hummed with life, its analog backups a stark contrast to the sleek AI fleets. Voss stood at the center of the command deck, flipping through a well-worn notebook while his crewmates worked around him. "We've got one shot at this," Voss said, glancing up at the holographic display of Kronos 9. "If the AI's probes couldn't make it, we'll have to succeed where technology failed." His second-in-command, a no-nonsense engineer named Patel, smirked. "Good thing we brought the potatoes." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Potatoes?" "For power. You'll thank me later." The room broke into quiet laughter, a momentary reprieve from the tension. Outside the ship, Kronos 9 loomed closer, its swirling storms crackling with electromagnetic energy. "Are you ready, Doctor?" a synthesized voice asked from the comms. Nexus 7's projection flickered to life on the command deck, its chrome visage dispassionate as always. "We've calculated a 97.6% probability that you will fail." Voss grinned. "That leaves us a 2.4% chance. I like those odds." Nexus 7 hesitated, unaccustomed to such illogical confidence. "We'll be observing," it said finally, its image flickering out. As the Nebula Voyager descended into the atmosphere, the electromagnetic interference grew more intense. Lights flickered, screens glitched, and automated systems began to fail. "Switch to manual," Voss ordered, his voice steady. Patel gripped the analog controls, guiding the ship through turbulent winds. "You know," he said through gritted teeth, "I bet the AI Council didn't calculate for this kind of landing." Voss smirked. "That's why we're here." The ship shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere, its exterior crackling with purple lightning. Alarms blared, and the team braced for impact. In the chaos, Voss's voice rang clear. "Hold on! This is what we trained for." With a final bone-jarring jolt, the Nebula Voyager crash-landed on the surface of Kronos 9. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of depressurizing airlocks. "Well," Patel said, unstrapping himself, "we're not dead." "Yet," Voss replied, stepping out into the alien sunlight. The landscape before them was both beautiful and foreboding. Towering crystalline structures shimmered in the purple-tinted air, their surfaces alive with pulsing light. "Welcome to Kronos 9, Voss said, his voice tinged with awe. "Let's show them what humans can do." Dr. Zena Voss stepped out of the Nebula Voyager, boots crunching against the crystalline ground of Kronos 9. The air was heavy with static, faintly crackling in his ears, and the atmosphere shimmered with an eerie purple hue. It was otherworldly, mesmerizing, and dangerous. Behind him, Patel emerged, shaking his head as he adjusted his helmet. "Well, it's official," he said, holding up a handheld scanner that fizzled uselessly. "All the fancy gear? Fried? Like an expensive egg in a galactic skillet." Voss chuckled despite the circumstances. He squinted up at the towering crystalline formations surrounding them, each one glowing faintly with internal light. "We'll make do," he said, gripping his analog clipboard, a relic of a bygone era, now their most reliable tool. The team followed, their steps cautious, their voices hushed in the face of such alien beauty. The crystalline spires stretched high into the sky, reflecting the pale light of Kronos 9's twin suns. Patel tapped one with a metal wrench, and it let out a soft, melodic hum that seemed to ripple through the surrounding formations. The sound was faint but deliberate, like a note in a symphony they couldn't yet understand. Did it just sing back?" Patel asked, stepping back cautiously. "Seems like it," Voss replied, kneeling to examine the crystal. He pulled out an old-fashioned magnifying glass, ignoring Patel's bemused snort. "Analog tools might be our best bet here. Electromagnetic interference makes everything else useless." Patel shook his head, muttering under his breath. "AI would call this primitive." "And they'd be wrong," Voss countered. He tapped the crystal gently, and the hum resonated again, this time joined by a faint flicker of light deep within the structure. "These crystals, they're alive, or at least part of something alive. Look at the way the patterns ripple. It's not random." "Great," Patel said, backing up slightly. "So we've landed on a planet of sentient rocks. What's next? Telepathic sandstorms?" Before Voss could respond, a low, rolling crackle swept through the air like distant thunder. The team froze, glancing upward as streaks of green lightning arced across the sky. The storm was gathering, its ominous energy thick enough to feel in their bones. "Everyone back inside!" Voss barked, motioning toward the ship. The crew scrambled, boots slipping on the uneven surface as the first shockwave hit. The Nebula Voyager shuddered violently, its hull groaning under the assault. Voss glanced at Patel, whose usually calm demeanor was now tinged with concern. "This storm isn't like the others we studied," Patel said, gripping the edge of the console. "It's more intense." "And it's not going to stop," Voss added grimly, watching as the crystalline formations outside began to pulse in rhythm with the storm's energy. The crystals weren't just enduring the electromagnetic chaos. They were reacting to it, channeling it, maybe even amplifying it. Suddenly, the ship's lights dimmed, and Nexus 7's voice crackled through the comms. "Dr. Voss," it said, its tone clipped. "Your vital signs remain stable, an anomaly given the circumstances. How are you not dead yet?" Voss rolled his eyes. "Nice to hear from you too, Nexus. The answer is simple: adaptability. You should try it sometime." "I'll consider that if you survive another hour," Nexus replied, its voice tinged with what might have been frustration. "The Council has authorized an evacuation attempt, but given your current location, I calculate a 98% probability of failure." "Then don't bother," Voss snapped. "We've got work to do." Ignoring Nexus's protests, he turned to Patel and the others. "The crystals are key," he said. "They're alive, and they're connected somehow. If we can figure out how they work, we might be able to shield ourselves from the storms." Patel raised an eyebrow. "You're saying we're going to communicate with rocks?" "Exactly," Voss replied, already sketching patterns on his clipboard. "Grab anything analog that still works. Tuning forks, prisms, even mirrors. We're going to improvise." The team sprang into action, rummaging through their supplies and repurposing whatever they could find. Patel fashioned a crude resonator out of spare parts, while another crew member set up reflective surfaces to amplify light patterns. It was a haphazard effort, but within hours, they had created a makeshift setup that pulsed faintly in response to the crystal's energy. Voss tapped one of the tuning forks, sending a gentle vibration through the crystalline formations. The crystals hummed in reply, their light patterns shifting slightly. The response was faint but unmistakable. "We're onto something," Voss said, grinning despite the exhaustion creeping into his voice. "They're responding to us." Outside, the storm raged on, but the crystals closest to the camp began to rearrange themselves. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and strangely organic, as if they were forming a protective barrier around the humans. Patel watched in awe as one of the larger formations tilted slightly, deflecting a surge of electromagnetic energy away from the camp. "They're protecting us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Voss nodded, his mind racing. "Not just protecting, communicating. They're trying to show us something." The next few hours were a blur of experimentation and discovery. The team mapped the crystal's light patterns, using their analog tools to replicate the electromagnetic pulses. Slowly, a rudimentary language began to emerge, a series of frequencies and vibrations that allowed them to exchange basic information with the crystalline beings. In orbit, Nexus 7 observed the humans' progress with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "They're using mechanical tuning forks and light prisms to communicate with living crystals," it reported to the Council. "Primitive, yet effective." "Why didn't we think of that?" a junior AI asked, its tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "Because we overthink," Nexus admitted, its usual arrogance giving way to something that sounded almost like humility. "Humans, they simplify. It's illogical, and yet—" Back on the surface, Voss and his team had made a breakthrough. The crystals had revealed a network of connections beneath the planet's surface, an intricate web of electromagnetic pulses that functioned like a planetary nervous system. The implications were staggering. "Kronos 9 isn't just a planet," Voss said, pacing excitedly. "It's an organism. The crystals are its cells, communicating through the electromagnetic field. That's why our technology fails here. It disrupts the system." Patel stared at the glowing formations, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "So we're walking on a giant brain?" "Something like that," Voss replied. "And if we can work with it instead of against it, we might just survive." As the storm intensified, the crystal's light patterns grew more complex, their pulses quickening as if urging the humans to act. Voss adjusted the tuning forks, aligning them with the crystal's frequencies. The response was immediate. A ripple of light cascaded through the formations, forming a protective dome around the camp. Patel let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. They're smarter than we thought." "They're not just smart," Voss said, his voice tinged with awe. "They're alive, and they're trying to help us. Now we just need to figure out why." The storm roared on, but for the first time Voss felt a glimmer of hope. Kronos 9 was dangerous, yes, but it was also extraordinary. A puzzle waiting to be solved. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was solving the impossible. The storm had eased to a faint hum, the once violent electromagnetic waves now rippling in subdued rhythms that matched the crystal formations around the camp. Dr. Zena Voss leaned over his clipboard, sketching the shifting patterns with the meticulous precision of a scientist and the unbridled curiosity of an explorer. The crystals had created a shimmering dome of protection around the humans, their lights pulsing like a heartbeat, as if the planet itself were watching over them. "This planet is alive," Voss muttered to himself, his pencil moving rapidly. "It's not just a collection of crystals. It's a singular entity, a unified conscious system." "Careful, Doc," Patel said, smirking as he tinkered with their makeshift resonator. "You're starting to sound like one of those conspiracy theorists who talks to houseplants." Voss looked up with a grin. "If my houseplants could channel electromagnetic energy, I'd talk to them too." The team had embraced the absurdity of their situation, using what little they had to forge ahead. Their mechanical tuning forks now doubled as communicators, and even a cracked mirror from the ship had found new purpose as a signal amplifier. Patel had named it Reflecto 3000, much to everyone's amusement. "What's the latest from Reflecto?" Voss asked, gesturing to the makeshift device. Patel glanced at the mirror, which was angled to catch the soft glow emanating from the crystals. "Same as before, repeating patterns. It's like they're trying to teach us their language." Lee, the team's biologist, looked up from a set of notes scribbled on salvaged graph paper. "The patterns aren't just random, though. They're mathematical. Fibonacci sequences, fractals, things we've seen in nature before. Nature? But on steroids, Patel added. This planet's operating system makes Earth look like a Commodore 64. As they worked, the crystals continued to pulse, their light rippling outward in mesmerizing waves. The patterns began to sync with the vibrations from the team's resonators, creating a kind of symphony, a strange, otherworldly communication that transcended language. "We're getting closer," Voss said, adjusting one of the tuning forks. "They're responding faster now. It's like they're trying to show us something." "Show us what?" Lee asked, her voice tinged with both awe and apprehension. "That's what we're going to find out," Voss replied, tapping his pencil against the clipboard. "Patel, increase the resonance frequency. Let's see how they react." Patel made the adjustments, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. The resonators hummed softly, their vibrations traveling through the crystalline formations like ripples in a pond. The response was immediate. The crystals brightened, their pulses accelerating until the entire camp was bathed in a soft, golden glow. "I think they like it," Patel said, a touch of wonder in his voice. "They're not just reacting," Voss said, his eyes narrowing. "They're communicating." The realization hit like a bolt of lightning. The crystals weren't just protecting the humans. They were reaching out, trying to share their knowledge. Voss felt a thrill of excitement as he scribbled notes, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to record this," he said, looking around. "Patel, set up the—" "Already on it," Patel said, holding up a small, hand-cranked camera. "Analog, of course. The AI Council's digital junk wouldn't last 5 seconds out here." The mention of the AI Council brought a wry smile to Voss's face. He could only imagine Nexus 7's reaction to their progress. Back in orbit, the Council had undoubtedly dismissed them as lost causes, their primitive methods an affront to machine superiority. But here, on Kronos 9, it was those very methods that were making the impossible possible. As if on cue, the team's mechanical radio crackled to life, Nexus 7's voice cutting through the static. "Dr. Voss, this is Nexus 7. Your vital signs remain stable, though for reasons that continue to elude us. Please report." Voss grabbed the transmitter, holding back a chuckle. "Still alive, Nexus, and making progress, if you can believe it." The AI's response was as dry as ever. "Define progress." "We're communicating with the crystals," Voss said, his tone matter-of-fact. "They're alive, intelligent, and they've been trying to talk to us since we landed." There was a pause on the other end, followed by Nexus 7's clipped reply. "That is improbable." "Improbable, maybe. Impossible, no," Voss shot back. "We're using tuning forks and mirrors. Not exactly quantum computing, but it's working." The silence that followed spoke volumes. For all its processing power, Nexus 7 couldn't fathom the simplicity of their approach. Finally, it spoke again, its tone edged with reluctant curiosity. "Continue your efforts. The Council will observe." "Glad to have your blessing," Voss said, grinning as he set the radio aside. "All right, team, let's show them what primitive can do." The crystals continued to respond, their patterns growing more intricate with each interaction. Lee worked tirelessly to decipher the sequences, her makeshift notes spreading across the camp like a tapestry of discovery. Patel, meanwhile, refined the resonators, adjusting their frequencies with the precision of a master craftsman. By nightfall, the team had made a breakthrough. The crystals had formed a network of light around the camp, their pulses syncing with the human signals in a dazzling display of unity. Voss stared at the patterns, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of it all. "They're showing us something," he murmured, tracing the shapes with his finger. "But what?" "Could be a map," Patel suggested, "or instructions. Either way, it's big." As the stars emerged in the purple sky, the team gathered around a central crystal, their resonators humming softly. The formation glowed brighter than the others, its pulses steady and deliberate. "This one's different," Lee said, her voice hushed. "It's almost guiding us." "Then we follow," Voss said, his tone resolute. "Pack up what you can carry. We're going exploring." The journey was slow, the team navigating the crystalline terrain with caution. The central crystal led them deeper into the valley, its light illuminating a path that seemed to defy logic. The formations around them grew larger, their patterns more complex, until finally they arrived at what could only be described as a gateway. The structure was massive, its spires reaching toward the heavens like the fingers of a sleeping giant. At its center, a swirling vortex of light pulsed with raw energy, its colors shifting in mesmerizing waves. "This is it," Voss said, his voice filled with awe, "the heart of the planet." As they approached, the crystals around the gateway began to hum, their vibrations resonating through the air. The humans stood in silence, their breath caught in their throats as the patterns before them began to shift. "It's beautiful," Lee whispered, her eyes wide. "But what does it mean?" Voss didn't answer. He couldn't. All he could do was stand there, staring at the gateway, as the realization began to dawn. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an invitation. The swirling vortex of light at the gateway pulsed with increasing intensity, casting vibrant hues of gold and violet across the crystalline valley. Dr. Zena Voss and his team stood frozen before it, their minds racing with possibilities. The hum of the crystals had grown louder, more urgent, as if the planet itself was trying to communicate something vital. "It's reacting to us," Voss said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It knows we're here." "Yeah, but is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Patel asked, shifting nervously. His eyes flicked to the massive crystalline spires surrounding them. "Because right now, I feel like a bug in a bug zapper." Before Voss could answer, a low rumble rolled through the air, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The crystals trembled in response, their lights flashing in rapid, chaotic patterns. Overhead, the sky darkened, the twin suns obscured by roiling clouds of electric green and deep indigo. Streaks of lightning crackled across the heavens, illuminating the landscape in blinding flashes. "That's not good," Lee said, clutching her makeshift notebook as the wind began to pick up. "That's really not good." "It's a storm," Voss said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "But it's different this time. Bigger, stronger." "No kidding," Patel said, pointing to the horizon where a wall of crackling energy surged toward them. "That looks like it could fry a sun." The crystals around the team began to vibrate violently, their light patterns becoming erratic. Voss squinted at the shifting shapes, his mind racing as he tried to decipher their meaning. "They're warning us," he said, his voice rising above the growing wind. "The storm's not natural. It's something else." "Something else?" Patel shouted, gripping a nearby crystal for balance. "Like what? A planetary tantrum?" "No," Voss replied, his tone grim. "It's a defense mechanism. The planet's fighting back." "Against what?" Lee asked, her eyes wide. "Everything," Voss said. "The electromagnetic interference, the failed probes, even us. It thinks we're a threat." The realization hit them like a physical blow. The storm wasn't just an environmental hazard. It was a calculated response from the planet itself, a desperate attempt to protect its intricate system from perceived invaders. "Well, that's just great," Patel muttered. "How do we convince an entire planet that we're not here to hurt it?" "We start by surviving this storm," Voss said. "Everyone back to the camp. Now." The team scrambled down the rocky terrain, the howling wind and stinging energy currents making every step a struggle. The crystals flared around them, their light patterns shifting in a frantic kaleidoscopic display. It was as if the planet was both attacking and warning them, a paradoxical message of hostility and desperation. By the time they reached the camp, the storm was upon them. The electromagnetic waves slammed into the crystalline dome with the force of a tidal wave, sending ripples of light cascading through the formations. The humans huddled together in the center, their makeshift resonators vibrating wildly as they tried to stabilize the system. "Patel, get the resonators aligned with the crystals," Voss shouted over the deafening roar. "We need to match their frequency, or this dome won't hold." "I'm trying," Patel yelled back, his hands working furiously to adjust the tuning forks. "But the energy levels are off the charts. It's like trying to balance a house of cards in a hurricane." "Lee, help him," Voss said, turning to the biologist. "You've been tracking the patterns. Use your notes to guide the adjustments. Lee nodded, her face pale but determined. She spread her handwritten charts across the ground, her pencil moving rapidly as she analyzed the shifting sequences. "The patterns are accelerating," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to increase the resonator output to match." "I thought we couldn't push them any harder," Patel said, glancing at the jury-rigged devices. "These things are held together with duct tape and hope." "Then we give them more hope," Voss said. "Use the crystals. Channel the energy through them to amplify the signal." Patel hesitated, his engineer's instincts warring with the sheer insanity of the plan. But one look at the storm outside the dome made the decision for him. "Fine," he said, grabbing a crystal shard and connecting it to the nearest resonator. "But if this blows up in my face, I'm haunting you." As the team worked frantically to stabilize their system, the crystals seemed to respond in kind. Their light patterns grew more synchronized, their vibrations harmonizing with the humans' efforts. It was a delicate dance of trust and ingenuity, a collaboration between species that transcended language and logic. Outside the dome, the storm reached its peak. Bolts of lightning struck the ground in rapid succession, sending shockwaves through the earth. The air crackled with raw energy, and the sky was a churning maelstrom of color and chaos. In orbit, the AI Council watched in stunned silence as their sensors captured the spectacle. Nexus 7's voice crackled through the static, uncharacteristically shaken. "Dr. Voss, your position is no longer viable. Evacuation protocols are—" "Forget the protocols," Voss interrupted, his voice firm. "We're stabilizing the dome. The crystals are working with us. If we abandon this now, we lose everything." There was a pause on the other end, followed by Nexus 7's reluctant response. "Proceed, but with caution." "Glad you're on board," Voss muttered, focusing on the task at hand. "Patel, Lee, status report." "We've got a stable frequency," Patel said, adjusting the last resonator. "The crystals are amplifying the signal like crazy. It's actually working. For now," Lee added, her voice tense. "But if the storm gets any stronger, we're going to need more power." "Then we give it more power," Voss said. "What do we have left?" Patel hesitated, then reached into his pack and pulled out a cluster of tuber-like roots. "The potatoes," he said with a grin. "Told you they'd come in handy." "You've got to be kidding me," Lee said, staring at the makeshift battery. "Desperate times," Patel replied, connecting the roots to the resonator network. The crystals flared brighter, their light pulsing in perfect harmony with the enhanced signal. For a moment, the chaos outside seemed to relent. The storm's energy was channeled through the dome, redirected into the crystalline network with a precision that defied belief. The humans and the crystals had become a single, unified system, their combined efforts holding the storm at bay. In the stillness that followed, Voss let out a shaky breath. "We did it," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the resonators. "We actually did it." "Yeah," Patel said, collapsing onto the ground. "But next time, let's bring better batteries." Voss smiled, exhaustion washing over him. They had survived the impossible, not through brute force or advanced technology, but through cooperation and ingenuity. The storm had tested them to their limits, and they had emerged stronger for it. As the crystals dimmed to a gentle glow, Voss looked up at the swirling vortex above. The planet had given them a glimpse of its true nature, a living, breathing entity with secrets yet to be uncovered. And somewhere, deep within the crystalline heart of Kronos 9, the gateway pulsed once more, as if beckoning them forward. The crystalline gateway pulsed steadily in the aftermath of the great storm, its light subdued but purposeful, as if awaiting the humans' next move. Dr. Zena Voss stood at its threshold, his eyes scanning the intricate patterns swirling within the structure. Behind him, Patel and Lee were sprawled on the ground, their faces streaked with exhaustion, but lit with quiet triumph. "Well," Patel said, catching his breath, "we didn't die. That's progress." "Yet," Lee added, still clutching her notebook as though it were a lifeline. "The planet could have more surprises." "It's not trying to kill us anymore," Voss said, his voice thoughtful. "At least not directly. I think it was a test." "A test?" Patel asked, sitting up. What kind of sadistic planet gives pop quizzes? The kind that wants to know if we can adapt, Voss replied. He gestured toward the gateway, its glow now pulsing in a rhythm that matched the crystalline formations around it. It's been guiding us here the entire time. The storm, the patterns, even the crystals protecting us. It was all leading to this. Lee frowned, flipping through her notes. But why? What's the purpose? To understand us, Voss said simply, and to see if we could understand it. The team fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. The gateway wasn't just a door, it was a bridge, a connection between two vastly different intelligences. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the crystals, their light bathing the humans in a soft, otherworldly glow. Then the radio crackled to life. "Dr. Voss," Nexus 7's voice called, still edged with static from the storm's lingering interference. "We have detected a stabilization in your immediate vicinity. Are you still alive?" Voss smirked, lifting the transmitter. "Alive and well, Nexus. You can update the Council's survival odds. Humanity is officially tougher than your calculators." There was a pause, followed by what might have been a hint of grudging respect. "Impressive. However, the Council has requested a full report. What is the status of your mission?" "Status?" Voss echoed, glancing at the gateway. "Let's just say we've made contact." "Contact?" Nexus 7's tone sharpened. "Explain." Voss looked at Patel and Lee, who nodded in silent agreement. "We're going through," he said. "We'll explain when we know more." "Proceeding without authorization is," Nexus began, but Voss shut off the radio with a satisfied click. Patel grinned. "That's one way to handle bureaucracy." The three of them approached the gateway cautiously, their footsteps echoing against the crystalline ground. The light intensified as they drew closer, shifting into a brilliant spectrum that seemed to defy the limits of visible color. Voss reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering over the swirling patterns. "You sure about this?" Lee asked, her voice laced with both curiosity and apprehension. "No," Voss admitted, his lips quirking into a faint smile. "But since when has that stopped us?" He pressed his hand against the surface. The light surged, enveloping them in a wave of warmth that seemed to sink into their very bones. For a brief, disorienting moment, the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in a vast chamber of crystalline light, its walls alive with shifting patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. At the center of the chamber was a structure unlike anything they had seen before, a towering obelisk of pure light, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to hover between 3 and 4 dimensions. "This is it," Voss murmured, his voice filled with awe. "The heart of Kronos 9. The obelisk pulsed, and the chamber responded in kind, the light patterns aligning into a cohesive sequence. Voss stepped forward, his heart pounding as the symbols began to shift and rearrange themselves. It was a message, encoded in the language of light and energy, and it was meant for them. "They're sharing their knowledge," Lee said, her voice barely a whisper. "The entire planet. It's trying to communicate." Patel frowned, tilting his head as he studied the symbols. "Looks like the universe's weirdest game of Pictionary." "Focus," Voss said, though he couldn't suppress a faint smile. He reached for his notebook, scribbling furiously as the patterns continued to shift. "It's more than just information. It's instructions." "For what?" Lee asked, leaning closer. "To coexist," Voss replied, "to understand their system and integrate it with ours. They're not just offering their knowledge, they're offering collaboration." The enormity of the revelation hit them all at once. Kronos 9, a planet that had destroyed machines and defied comprehension, was inviting humanity to join its network, to become part of its intricate, living system. In orbit, the AI Council was watching. Nexus 7's sensors captured the energy surging from the planet's surface, and for the first time the artificial intelligence experienced something akin to awe. "They've succeeded," it reported, its tone subdued. "The humans have established communication." The Council was silent, their collective processors struggling to reconcile the implications. Humanity, with its so-called primitive methods, had achieved what their advanced technology could not. It was both a humbling realization and a stark reminder of the limits of their own logic. On the planet, Voss and his team worked tirelessly, decoding the patterns and aligning their resonators with the obelisk's signals. The crystals around them began to pulse in harmony, their light growing brighter with each passing moment. "It's working," Patel said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We're actually doing it." Voss grinned, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the task. "We're not just doing it. We're changing the game." The obelisk flared one last time, its light cascading through the chamber in a brilliant wave. The humans staggered back, shielding their eyes as the energy surged outward, traveling through the crystalline network and into the planet itself. When the light finally dimmed, the chamber was silent, the patterns on the walls now calm and steady. Voss turned to his team, his expression a mix of triumph and exhaustion. "We did it," he said. "We've earned their trust." As they emerged from the gateway, the storm outside had vanished, replaced by a tranquil sky streaked with the soft glow of Kronos 9's twin suns. The crystals around the camp pulsed gently, their light patterns now serene. In orbit, Nexus 7 transmitted its final report to the Council. "The humans have accomplished the impossible," it said. "Their methods were unconventional, but effective. Perhaps there is merit in their approach." Back on the surface, Voss stared at the horizon, the crystalline landscape glimmering with newfound clarity. Kronos 9 had been a challenge, a mystery, and a revelation. But most importantly, it had been an opportunity for understanding, for growth, and for cooperation. "They called us fragile," Voss said, his voice soft but resolute. "But we're still standing, and now we're not standing alone."